So, what are the wealthiest zip codes in Massachusetts? To break down all the numbers on the richest places to live in the state, Maya Shavit, reporter for our partners at the Boston Business Journal, joins us. And Maya, thanks so much for being with us. First off, let's talk about neighborhoods in the city limits. How did those do?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. So the greater Boston area has some of the wealthiest pockets of Massachusetts, actually, is what we found. A lot of people kind of think that wealth primarily lives outside of the city, but in fact, the number one zip code on the list is Back Bay, and the majority of the top 10 in our wealthiest zip ranking is in or very close to the city.
And as it's related to that, what metrics did you use to calculate these rankings?
Yeah, so we used a proprietary research methodology at the Business Journal, and we looked really closely at every single zip code in the state of Massachusetts. So the goal here was to really understand the concentrations of wealth in a fair and accurate way. And we did that by taking in a survey that broke down the zip codes of every wealth influencing factor. So we thought some of the important factors there are household income, typical home price, age, education, sort of things of that sorts. Then we kind of took it even further and we broke it down in a detailed way, looking at the threshold for actually how much people are earning. So 65K was a threshold number that we chose to sort of put as a standard just before you to make it fair, to understand kind of this impact of poverty and where people are even beginning to have the wealth in these neighborhoods. And that actually is how you get to an even smaller number of zip codes, to around just over 130, which encapsulates the wealthiest zip codes in total of the state.
So, outside of Boston, where was the most money?
Yeah, so Arlington was sort of the only non-Boston area to rank in the top 10, and then closely behind Cambridge and then the Newton area kind of fall in there.
Was there a specific spot or maybe two spots or three spots that you saw that were on the rise the most?
Yeah, so this is actually the first year that we've done such a comprehensive database ranking at the journal. There sort of isn't something of its kind that we had done before, but we have obviously looked at wealth, and as a publication, we've been focusing on these trends for a long time. And there were some changes in terms of who was making the most noticeable impact. And Dover was one area that had historically been like very high up ranking, and it didn't show up in our top 10 this year. It kind of was pushed away.
What other surprises did you see in the data outside of that?
Yeah. So something that was really surprising to me was actually the age range of the people living in the wealthiest areas of the state. Our top 10 had a median age range that sat under 35. So there's a type of millennial migration happening in Boston that has wealth attached to it. And then when we look at places like Southie, for example, that rank number two in the state, our data shows us that young professionals, leaders, and families are living in some of the wealthiest parts of the state in the city of Boston. And then further, in conversations I had with neighborhood experts, I learned that older individuals who are sort of longtime residents of the city are being pushed out and they're kind of becoming a part of the poverty rate.
You also looked at the wealthiest towns on Cape Cod. Tell us about that.
So, while the highest concentrations of wealth in Massachusetts are in Boston, the Cape and Islands contain several zip codes that are pretty high on our list. Sort of at the top, we're North Chatham and the Chatham area, and they lead the Cape region with the highest ranking. And then what sort of is making them stand out is home value. And then further, not necessarily Cape Cod, but outside of the city and just under Cape Cod, Nantucket ranks really highly in terms of highest typical home value. And that number is close to 3 million.
As you look at just the state in general, I mean, what does the data say to you in terms of the relationship of the price of places to live within the state compared to other states around it here in the Northeast and in the United States as well?
Well, I think Boston continues to be a really expensive place to live, and that's no surprise to anybody. But what's really interesting is people are not necessarily of the older demographics and obtaining and collecting this wealth later on. These millennials, these young families, these generations are kind of taking over these new areas, and there's this new wave of wealth that's happening in Boston, and it shows that migration patterns are happening and wealth continues to shift across the city and sort of echo out from there.
Well, Maya Shavit, thanks so much for the time. It's a really interesting read that you guys have on the website. We appreciate you joining us to talk about it again. Maya Shavit of the Boston Business Journal, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.